I am very happy to invite up Chris Bachelder and Jennifer Habel to the podium for a reading that I have been very much looking forward to.
Does your mic work?
Yeah. Sound okay? All right.
It's a pleasure to be here. Such a pleasure to read with Tarfia as well. So grateful to Leah, to Gwen. Thanks for this, Gwen. That's a sweet podium. I'm the diva who asked for two of them. To Adam, to the staff, the Cincinnati Mafia. Delighted to be a part of this conference. It's just so well run, and everybody's been so gracious and accommodating. I want to introduce Jennifer Habel. Jen will read with me tonight. She's a writer. We're married to each other. And like a lot of couples during the pandemic, Jen and I decided to collaborate on an experimental novel about Herman Melville. It was like sourdough bread or Melville. It's called Day's Work. It's a kind of peculiar version of a pandemic journal written by a woman who is obsessively researching Melville and who, as a way of dealing with the formlessness or sort of timelessness of lockdown, rises each morning before her family and writes in a undated day planner statements about Herman Melville's life and his work, and also about some tributary figures and subjects as well. She moves non-chronologically. She moves somewhat digressively, though kind of rigorously, statement to statement. She relies heavily on quotation. Some of the quotes will be obvious, others won't. We're not going to try to explicitly indicate which are direct quotes. I think you can figure it out. The book is continuous. There are no section breaks or chapter breaks, so it just moves statement to statement to statement. And we're taking this middle, we're just reading from the middle, trying to find a passage that has some shape. You might help to know, though, the book circles back and over and again to 1850 to 1851, this year in Melville's life, where he impulsively bought a farm and a house in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, 6 miles from where Hawthorne's lived. And during this year, he spent time with Hawthorne. He worked on his farm, and he also maniacally rewrote Moby Dick during that year, turning it from a kind of conventional adventure story into what we know it to be now. There are many biographers of Melville, but there's one character that we just call the biographer, and that's Herschel Parker, who wrote a massive 2-volume biography of Melville, and is just an interesting person, and who just is just a presence in the book throughout. And finally, during the pages we read, we'll allude to a poem that we quoted earlier, a line from a poem we quoted earlier, and the line is from Robert Hass, and it's brutal the way some lives seem to work and some don't. That's the line. And incidentally, the line is from a poem called A Talk at Sewanee. And so it was inspired years ago, I think, from a craft lecture by Ellen Douglas. So anyway.
Yeah, okay. In early October 1850, Melville moved into his new house with his mother, 3 sisters, wife, and baby Malcolm.
Upon Malcolm's birth, an ecstatic Melville had written, "I think of calling him Barbarossa, Adolphus, Ferdinand, Otho, Grandissimo, Hercules, Samson, Bonaparte, Lambert."
Melville named his Pittsfield farm Arrowhead after the Native American artifacts he unearthed with his plow. In their letters, the family began to call themselves the Arrowheads. Their first fall on the farm was lovely. On October 6th, Melville wrote to a friend, "It has been a most glowing and Byzantine day, the heavens reflecting the tints of the October apples in the orchard. You should see the maples. You should see the young perennial pines." For weeks that fall, Melville worked outdoors, plowing fields, splitting wood, tending animals, harvesting apples. "Everything to be done and scarcely anyone to help me do it," he wrote. "But I trust that before a great while we shall be all to rights, and I shall take my ease on mine mountain."
By taking his ease, he presumably meant locking himself in his new study to resume work on a novel about whale hunting.
By Thanksgiving, he was sufficiently immersed in the book that he did not join his wife and child on their trip to Boston, where they remained until January. But there were still chores and distractions at home. Because he wouldn't allow the women to drive the horse and wagon, he had to take them on their errands and visits.
And because his second-floor study was the largest room at Arrowhead, he had to allow them to use it to entertain family at the holiday. They fed 10 people on a stormy day. Herman, offering his arm to Aunt Mary, led the way, the tribe of Melville following one by one up that stairs of many angles, his sister Augusta later reported. Everything was beautifully cooked and everyone beautifully happy.
Coincidentally, next Thursday is Thanksgiving. The CDC recommends celebrating virtually or with members of your own household. One member of my household wants to know if we can still dress up.
Sure.
Another wants to know if she can try wine.
Maybe.
We'll dress up, say our thanks, eat a plant-based roast. We'll Zoom the distant elders sheltered in place, then play a game, Boggle, or Ticket to Ride. In the Boggle box, the foxed lists of words in my grandmother's fine cursive.
On Thanksgiving 1850, the Melville tribe played a fortune-telling game called Home Oracles. Tea at 7, eggnog at 9. Their guests begged they might not be asked to partake of anything more, even if it were Thanksgiving.
This was, incidentally, 13 years before Lincoln established the fourth Thursday of November as a national holiday. God's gifts he proclaimed on October 3, 1863, 3 months after the Battle of Gettysburg, should be solemnly, reverently, and gratefully acknowledged as with one heart and one voice by the whole American people. Up to that point, Thanksgiving had been celebrated on different days by individual states, primarily in the North.
Days before he issued his proclamation, Lincoln received a letter from Sarah Josepha Hale, imploring him to create a national holiday of thanks. For 36 years, Hale, a writer and editor of a prominent women's magazine, had been writing editorials and lobbying officials about this issue. Hale, incidentally, is the author of Mary Had a Little Lamb.
After her husband died, leaving her a meager estate and 5 young children, she decided to pursue a literary career as a way to support her family. There were, she explained, very few employments in which females can engage with any hope of profit, and my own constitution and pursuits made literature appear my best resource. She published nearly 50 books in her lifetime. Mary Had a Little Lamb appeared in her second volume of poetry, Poems for Our Children, 1830. It so happens that on December 6, 1877, Thomas Edison recited the first stanza of Mary Had a Little Lamb into his phonograph, the first recording of a human voice.
Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow.
Snow white was Ahab's ivory leg, and snow white Moby Dick's brow and hump.
It was the whiteness of the whale that above all things appalled me. There lurks an elusive something in the innermost idea of this hue, which strikes more of panic to the soul than that redness which affrights in blood.
Doom, 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 according to D.H. Lawrence. According to Lawrence, Melville knew his race was doomed, his white soul doomed, his great white epic doomed.
What I am suggesting, Toni Morrison said of Melville in a lecture delivered in 1988, is that he was overwhelmed by the philosophical and metaphysical inconsistencies of an extraordinary and unprecedented idea that had its fullest manifestation in his own time and his own country, and that idea was the successful assertion of whiteness as ideology.
Melville takes on the concept of evil according to Yusuf Komunyakaa. He shows us that whiteness is a map of obsession. White Ahab hunting whiteness, doomed.
If the great white whale sank the ship of the great white soul in 1851, Lawrence asked in an essay published in 1923, what's been happening ever since?
Post-mortem effects, presumably, he answered.
What's been happening ever since?
And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
I've written a wicked book, Melville wrote to Hawthorne, and feel spotless as the lamb.
What does it feel like, one wonders, asked Walker Percy, to have written Moby Dick? Each morning, after feeding his horse and cow, Melville would start a fire, then spread out his manuscript on a table beneath a window that faced snowy Mount Greylock.
He meant his scope to be the whole great whale of the world, according to Jill Lepore.
an immensity of aspiration that makes the previous tales seem to be boys' books, according to Elizabeth Hardwick.
Friends, hold my arms, exclaims Ishmael, for in the mere act of penning my thoughts of this Leviathan, they weary me and make me faint with their outreaching comprehensiveness of sweep, as if to include the whole circle of the sciences and all the generations of whales and men and mastodons, past, present, and to come, with all the revolving panoramas of empire on earth and throughout the whole universe, not excluding its suburbs.
An elation of freedom and passion, according to Hardwick, as well as a violent submersion near to drowning.
Triumphant taking on of hell and coming through, according to Walker Percy.
An unabated frenzy of inspiration, according to Paul Auster.
An all-involving and psychically corrosive experience, according to Nathaniel Philbrick.
As for David Gilbert, he cannot hold the book without feeling the vertiginous swell of its creation.
Been reading Moby Dick again, wrote Ralph Ellison in a letter to Albert Murray, and appreciating for the first time what a truly good time Melville was having when he wrote it. The book, Ellison noted, is pervaded by the spirit of play like real jazz sounds when a master is manipulating it. The thing's full of riffs, man, he wrote.
According to Walker Percy, the happiness of Melville in Moby Dick is the happiness of the artist discovering, breaking through into the freedom of his art. In this novel, everything works. One kills 6 birds with every stone.
In December 1850, though, Melville wrote to a friend that taking a book off the brain is akin to the ticklish and dangerous business of taking an old painting off a panel. You have to scrape off the whole brain in order to get at it with due safety, and even then the painting may not be worth the trouble. He wrote the letter by candlelight, one eye shut and the other squinting. By the end of his day's work, he couldn't see well and spent his evenings in a sort of mesmeric state.
Tender as young sparrows, Melville once described his eyes,
which Charles Olson in his book Call Me Ishmael misquoted, perhaps mistranscribed as tender as young sperms.
A doctor in the Western Journal of Medicine claims that Melville described his eyes as tender as pigeons' eggs, but provides no source, nor this morning can I find one.
Initially, Melville's writing day ended at 2:30 when he heard a preconcerted knock on his study door. The women in the house were instructed to keep knocking until he rose from his desk. While he wrote, they cooked, composed letters, completed chores, and copied his pages. They looked forward to being taken to the post office in the village by wagon or sleigh. We visit the post office with such interest every evening and are so disappointed if there's nothing for us, wrote his sister Augusta.
But as the winter progressed, Melville extended his writing day. His wife later recalled that he would sit at his desk all day, not eating anything till 4 or 5 o'clock, then ride to the village after dark. When dinner trays were brought up in the evening, the lunch trays would still be there.
In January, Melville, increasingly frustrated and angry when his work was interrupted, capitulated to the women's repeated request to be allowed to drive the wagon. As you may imagine, we are all highly delighted at the idea of being able to drive off whenever we have an inclination to taste the fresh air, Augusta wrote to one of her sisters. Now we shall be quite independent.
On January 22nd, Melville decided to visit Hawthorne for the first time since he moved to Arrowhead. He drove the wagon through snow, 6 miles of jutted, jolting road, and brought with him his shaggy black Newfoundland, whose name I've just this morning discovered.
Major.
40 miles away, incidentally, Emily Dickinson also had a Newfoundland, Carlo, whom in a letter she identified, along with hills and the sundown, as one of her 3 companions. Her mute confederate she called Carlo, her shaggy ally.
Melville, whom the Hawthorne children referred to as Mr. Omu, allowed them to ride on his Newfoundland. On one winter visit, very likely this one, the children showed him the grave of a bird they had found dead that day in the bough of a fir tree. They hoped it would come back to life in the spring.
Melville was welcomed, fed cold chicken, and given 2 of Hawthorne's books, Twice Told Tales and For Malcolm, Grandfather's Chair. In Twice Told Tales, he marked the following passage. "Friend," replied the little boy in a sweet, though faltering voice, "they call me Ilbrahim, and my home is here." It has been suggested that this passage may have influenced the famous first line of Moby Dick.
It's Margaret Atwood's favorite first line. "Why Ishmael," she tweeted. "It's not his real name. Who's he speaking to, eh?"
A second before, this person was likely a John or a Philip, a Henry, wrote David Gilbert, who also names Call Me Ishmael as his favorite first line.
Call Me Jonah begins Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle.
Call Me Smitty begins Philip Roth's The Great American Novel.
Call Me Monk culminates the opening paragraph of Percival Everett's Erasure.
My Name is Ruth begins Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping, which she calls her Moby Jane. We both drowned a lot of people, Robinson told an interviewer, laughing.
The opening paragraph of the first chapter of Moby Dick is, according to Ta-Nehisi Coates, the greatest paragraph in any work of fiction at any point in all of history. And not just human history, but galactic history and extraterrestrial history too. Do not come to me with your drab and sorry works which I have not read. Melville desecrates their temples, steals their horses, and howls among the lamentation. Damn right, Coates wrote. Melville, Melville, Melville.
Melville.
Age 31.
Indebted.
Poor-sighted.
Landlocked.
At a table beneath a window.
Conjuring a ship full of men.
In a house full of women.
Come, no nonsense, he wrote to Hawthorne. If you don't, I will send constables after you. We will have mulled wine with wisdom and buttered toast with storytelling and cracked jokes and bottles from morning till night.
Ultimately, nothing counted more for him than a mate to whom he could tell everything, according to Geoffrey O'Brien, mate being a term male and nautical rather than female and domestic.
According to Henry A. Murray, a fundamental dichotomy expressed as sea versus land runs through Melville's writing. With the sea, open space, freedom, adventure, danger, the heart, spontaneity, selfless benevolence, single-hearted dedication, passionate undirected thought, truth-seeking, zeal for heaven and immortality, God and insanity.
And with the land, closed or structured space, slavishness, family obligations, domestic comfort, safety, the head, cool directed thinking, the calculations of self-interest, propriety, the world, and conventional common sense.
Repeatedly, he valorized the former. I stand for the heart, he wrote to Hawthorne, to the dogs with the head.
A maxim he evidently followed when undertaking home improvements at Arrowhead that winter. He hired workers to begin construction not only of crucial additions such as a new kitchen and woodhouse, but also of a long and narrow porch running beneath his study, his piazza.
A luxury for Melville, according to the biographer, precipitously and expensively started when the ground was hard, grotesquely impractical, badly designed, oddly placed. But alone on his porch, he could, in his modest fashion, reconcile the dichotomy represented by the land and the sea.
I like piazzas, as somehow combining the coziness of indoors with the freedom of outdoors, he wrote in his tale, The Piazza. His view in summer reminded him of the sea. The vastness and the lonesomeness are so oceanic, and the silence and the sameness too, that the first peep of a strange house rising beyond the trees is for all the world like spying on the Barbary coast an unknown sail. And in winter, once more with frosted beard, I pace the sleety deck, weathering Cape Horn.
Melville could ill afford the necessary renovations to his home, let alone his personal piazza. In early March, having received crushing financial news about his debts, he impulsively escaped to the Hawthornes at the end of a writing day.
At dusk arrived Herman Melville from Pittsfield, a very pregnant Sophia Hawthorne recorded in her diary. He was entertained with champagne foam, manufactured of beaten eggs, loaf sugar, and champagne, as well as bread and butter and cheese.
Melville stayed the night, and the following morning he took Hawthorne and Hawthorne's 7-year-old daughter Una through a snowstorm back to Arrowhead. Una, whom Hawthorne sometimes called Onion, and who died in England at 33 after much illness and disappointment, I've just learned, whose life, in Robert Hass's formulation, did not seem to work.
Before Melville left with Hawthorne and Una for Pittsfield, Sophia gave him a steel engraving of a portrait of Hawthorne. This portrait, hanging in Melville's study at the time of his death 40 years later, is now in the Herman Melville Memorial Room of the Berkshire Athenaeum, Pittsfield's public library.
The Berkshire Athenaeum will soon be the home for all of the biographer's materials on Melville. He has packed and mailed over 70 boxes and will send more when his health allows. Number 88 is on the plinth, he noted on his blog, awaiting taping and mailing.
Biographer has a long history with the Athenaeum, beginning in 1962 when he hitchhiked from New York to Pittsfield to research Melville for his dissertation. Most days he worked in solitude until children arrived after school. I thought it was wonderful, he wrote, little bustling students all around.
The Athenaeum is renovating its shelving to accommodate the biographer's books, notes, and letters. The cost of shipping and display might exceed $40,000, up to $10,000 of which the biographer has pledged. Janet Cook donated $10,000 in memory of her mother, Janet, who in retirement worked as a docent at Arrowhead and conducted research for the biographer. One day, according to her obituary, Janet Cook was asked to return to Arrowhead after closing to give two men a private tour that ended up lasting almost 3 hours.
Scorsese and Tarantino.
She had no idea who they were.
Janet Cook began to sob a bit when her donation in memory of her mother was announced at a ceremony at the Athenaeum in 2019. A local reporter covering the ceremony noted that the Athenaeum was where the biographer had begun his life's world.
Last year, an interviewer asked the biographer, then 84, if he has completed his life's work on Melville.
Who knows, he said.
The Berkshire Athenaeum is closed to public browsing and computer use effective Friday, November 13, 2020.
So no one may see the steel engraving of Hawthorne that hung on the wall of Melville's study.
So no one may see Herman Melville's 1856 passport or his customs inspector badge, number 75.
Or what is believed to be the desk at which he wrote Billy Budd, though the biographer is not certain.
Or the tin bread box in which his wife stored the manuscript of Billy Budd after his death.
Or a book, Landseer's Dogs and Their Stories, that Melville gave to his granddaughter for her 9th birthday, 7 months before his death, inscribed, Eleanor M. Thomas, from her grandfather Herman Melville, February 24, 1891.
For the time being, the Herman Melville Memorial Room is locked and dark. Perhaps one day I'll visit, provided it reopens, provided I can travel, provided I'm still interested.
One sheds one's sickness in books, wrote D.H. Lawrence.
I would say that one sheds one's interest, wrote Jeff Dyer in his book about trying to write a book about Lawrence. One begins writing a book about something because one is interested in that subject. One finishes writing a book in order to lose interest in that subject. But what is my subject? To produce a mighty book, you must choose a mighty theme, says Ishmael. No great and enduring volume can ever be written on the flea, though many there be who have tried it.
Avoid adjectives of scale. You will love the world more and desire it less, said Basho, according to Robert Hass.
All my sticky notes, color-coded, but I don't know the code.
Looks like your books have bloomed, my husband said. Flowers in the crannied wall, he said. But don't look up Byron, he said.
It's Tennyson.
Don't look up Tennyson, he said. Do not Google any lords.
According to one critic, Melville would never have finished his book today. He'd be constantly Googling whale.
This orange sticky note says, late timidity.
And this yellow one says Helen Vendler.
And this yellow one says Hawthorne himself was an inept businessman.
And this blue one is blank.
If I could pluck each one, root and all in all, they might be pages of a book called The Endless Winding Way.
Or Lucky Melville.
Or Under,
Or Home on the Deep.
or Along Dardanelles.
Life is a long Dardanelles, my dear madam, Melville wrote to Sophia Hawthorne. The shores whereof are bright with flowers, which we want to pluck, but the bank is too high, and so we float on, hoping to come to a landing place at last.
But swoop.
We launch into the great sea.
Thank you so much. Please welcome Tarfiah Faizullah.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be reading with y'all tonight. And thank you very much to everyone who makes this space possible. I know there's so much hard work going on, both behind the scenes and on site, so thank y'all very much for that. I'm not going to read from either one of my books tonight. They're grown now and they don't want anything to do with me. But I'm sure that they will find their way to you if you so wish. I decided for the first part of the reading, I'm going to read poems that I think of as stray poems, poems that I've written for different reasons that haven't ended up in any books for whatever reason. And I'm going to start light before we descend into the darkness. Okay. The first couple of poems I'm going to read are poems from a suite of poems I recently wrote for Oxford American's most recent food issue. And I find that commissioned poems always activate a slightly different kind of voice. And I'm interested in my own polyvocality. I think that we talk a lot about writers discovering their voice, but I'm sort of interested to discover how many voices I have exactly. For Francine. One last thing I want to say is that this poem came as a result of wanting to honor some of the ways we built connection and friendship during the pandemic. So FaceTime, for example, and Zoom and things like that were, vexing in a lot of ways, but without them, I wonder if it would have been even worse. For Francine. My friend Francine lives in Houston. Sometimes, on a soft and charmed evening, she FaceTimes me while she's cooking. "Baby bok choy," she croons. The screen pauses. I consider again the inevitable onset of twilight, then polenta, baby. Her curls unfreeze, prance, or pirouette. It is difficult to do them justice. She reminds me to cherish preparation as a process. Francine never wants to talk anymore once it's time to eat. I respect that. Dear Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I don't know. Somebody asked me, why did you write it to them? And I was sort of like, I don't know, I was looking for someone to write to. For a spell, I lived sheerly on instincts, talent, and a few smokes to get me by. Lately, I've been asking for more. I'd enjoy taking y'all to the Patel brothers in Irving, for example. They have magic masala ruffles. There's a chaat house next door, too, where they serve a nice cha and hot dosa to go. If you're looking for pigeons, you'll find plenty. That's not why I'm writing, though. Listen, I have a big problem. I cannot figure out how to write aha, not the expression of triumph or satisfaction after a win or a revelation, but how my mother says it, aha, musical and pained with understanding, i.e., after a death, i.e., after a regret. Aha, 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 aha. Why can't I get it right? Will you help? Will you help build monuments large enough to revere our nation's most tender sounds? Oh, okay. This next poem I'm going to read for Amitabha Bhai and also the rest of the South Asian contingent, the subcontinental contingent at the conference. This is a poem called Shocking Eastman Color, and Eastman Color was sort of, I guess, a successor to Technicolor, and it was the process they used to colorize certain black and white films in the 50s. And this is an ekphrastic poem, I guess, that is written about a particular old black and white Bollywood movie called Chori Chori. And there's a song in it called Rustic Balma, and I won't tell you the plot, it's not important, but it's a really beautiful, fun movie if you feel like watching an old school Bollywood movie ever. And there's an epigraph, and it is from William Johnson's essay, Coming to Terms with Color. Ever since the modern alchemists learned how to transmute different wavelengths of light into a film image composed of equivalent dyes, there has been wide disagreement about the role of color on the screen. Shocking Eastman color. Actually, I'm gonna try something. I got inspired by the actors this week, so shocking Eastman color. That was pretty fun. I see why y'all like to do that. All right. If the rich heroine does get the last word, even now, alone in her bedroom while silken drapes languish just out of reach of her soft curls and exposed neck, when she lifts her cyan eyes, the magenta arabesques of the room's four-postered bed will dissolve into panes of shadow until only her profile remains, lit by a crystal-cupped candle. How could she have known then what she knows now? If a single colorized tear contorts her cheek, then dusk will close in, while sitars sob in unison. Note the gilded mirror, her self-portrait trapped on the wall in its frame. Both grieving faces, backlit, lifted in perfect profile. Note her lips, redder in black and white. This is a poem I wrote for my teacher, my former teacher, Claudia Emerson. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. We do it inelegantly. It was a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a moment that began in the beginning, when the first leaf understood it was a planet cradled by wind. You were there, we all were, and we could see at last the crust of the salt of our own mutinies. When was the last time how long has it been since we asked, and rubbed from our eyes the doctrines of our fears. But look how long it takes to melt the plastic bricks barricading us apart. Let's hurry up and laugh them away until we too are vapor, inshallah, and we'll summon the asphalt of yellow-ribboned highways. The lyric, you said, can contain, and so it does, end over end over end. Shit, I miss you. In a dream or memory, I married a man on horseback while behind us burned an accomplishment of editing, factories lit to blazing, spliced into 3 minutes on last night's news. Time felt so delicate that night, like a just cleaved apple right before its halves fall. I promised him nothing I couldn't take back. Your bright wing and the pen growing from your feathers uncapped, your agreement to never not try. How close are we to heaven, odd slingshots that we are? Yes, we do it inelegantly. We do it at all. This is a poem called Surah. Surah is the Arabic term for a chapter of the Quran. Surah. The falling paper flower, the plastic tree branch, the plight of reminiscing, the bureaucracy of kismet, the factories empty of logic, the bins to hold what's done, the spaceship of butterflies, the video game of intimacy, the series premiere of strife, the discretion of the cosmos, the sharp wisdom of the young. O friend who reads in a cave without light, the comb is for detangling the scars, and forward is not so far away. So, when I was living in Chicago, I was walking somewhere, and I don't know what to refer to the folks who are handing out stuff on sidewalks but anyway, one of those folks. And they were handing out this book called Rights and Duties of Women in Islam. And I had to cop it. I was like, I have to know what I'm gonna do with this, for sure. And then when I took it off the shelf, I threw it in my suitcase last minute. in case I wanted to work on it and maybe read from it while I was here. And there's a little sticky note here that says, "Come to the event tonight." And there's a smiley face. And to be honest, reader, I don't know if I went to the event or not. So we'll never know. I have never read this before out loud, really, so we're going to see what happens. I've basically done some kind of erasure-looking things, although I was thinking that they seem more like smudges than erasures. But we're going to see how it goes. Women and freedom. Women are free, completely free. Freedom. Freedom. Freely. The right of freedom. Total freedom. 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 Freedom of women. Freedom of women. Freedom. Facts. Freedom. The freedoms of women. Delicate. Beautiful. Delicateness. Beauty. Attractive. Beauty. Delicate. Beauty. Attractive. Society. Attention. Attention. A profession. Protection. Attention. A profession. Profession. Happiness. Love. Affection. Profession. Ownership. Profession. Property. Profits. Permission. Partner. Permission. Parents. A particular person. Permission. Person. A particular person. Consent. Permission. Virgin. Permission. Maiden. Permission. Decision. Traditions. Virgin. Person. Widow. Girl. Girl. No one has the right to prevent continuing understanding. A house is arranging comfort and peace, sharing disturbance, changing desire, kindly. Choice. Choice. A family is a source of secrets, sincere support, sorrow, circumstances. I was going to do this whole thing where, because so many of my colleagues have been saying how many poems they're going to read, and I was going to do this whole thing where I say, I'm not telling y'all how many poems I'm going to read. Carl Phillips, my co-conspirator Carl Phillips, recently used the phrase twist and mystery. So I was going to say something about Carl saying that and how we all have to twist in the mystery of how many poems I'm going to read. And then I was going to use my iWatch to set a timer, but I'm not going to do any of that. It's just what was going to happen. It would have been cool, but now you can imagine it just a little bit. Okay, this next poem doesn't have a title. I wrote, "Don't be afraid," and was afraid. I wrote responsiveness, attentiveness, laughter, pamphlet, chair, armrest, cup holder. Tried drawing the path the sun made on paper and missed. As usual, had to look up the meaning of patience. You'd think by now I'd know. Wrote fidget, finger hole, which makes you think of holes in fingers, but finger hole isn't a word, except it is now that I've made it. To make is to make a mess of this life as many times as, well, I don't know the number, to be honest. Last night, I pointed a camera at a camera above a yellow sign that said safe place, with a house for an A. Does that make sense? Because I need you to understand it for the next part. The sign said safe place, and what it meant was surveillance, because a camera was there. And when I lifted my camera to it, I felt, what? Make it make sense. Do you understand? There was a house where an A should have been. There was a sign that said safe place when it wasn't. Make it sense make. Bewildered. I am. Yes, I am. I am so fucking wildered. All right, so I'm going to read for the rest of the time from a new book in progress. It's called Alien of Extraordinary Ability, which is a term given by immigration, U.S. Immigration and Visa Services, to basically, if you go to the ballet, for example, and you see dancers who are there, and they're not born and raised here, they're often here on that particular kind of visa, and then you can extend your stay. It's an incredible visa, I think, and it led me to thinking a lot about things like, how do we prove our ability? How do we measure things like achievement? Because this visa is particularly for artists and thinkers who have demonstrated a certain level of ability, and the idea of proving oneself is an interesting idea to me. And then also I think this poem is, I don't know, like this, right now it feels like a long poem more than it feels like individual poems, but some movements have more poemy feelings than others. There's some listing that happens. It's a little bit all over. It's a little bit in progress, but I couldn't resist reading it in this space and sharing it with y'all. So even if it doesn't make sense, we all get to go have a drink afterwards, so it's fine either way. And it begins with a quote by Rabindranath Tagore from his work Gitanjali. When one knows thee, then alien there is none, then no door is shut. Let's begin. Why do you want this visa? A visa or a home? Why this country? The gathering, the well-accommodated individuals. What are your plans here? Everyone likes sweet stuff sometimes. Ice cream, tea, coffee caramel. To sit with sweet people. To listen to a same sweet song. A life hammock. To arrive. To drive past ships in the life of night. To be a starseer. To build a spaceship out of the years named Solace. I.e., I missed you then, but we hadn't met yet. Either way, let's walk towards this frame to look for a door or a mirror. Listen to the moon. I ash on my granite heart. I stub a smoke out on my granite heart. This nightly for weeks. My granite heart grows a thick layer of ash. I do not notice until I do. I tip my granite heart into the sink. I rinse my granite heart with lavender hand soap. I scrub my granite heart. There is more than one burn mark. I touch each faint, dull trace. I turn away. I leave my granite heart to soak. Personal ornaments, collar discs, scepters and early imagery, Neolithic axes of the blank culture, blades, dagger axes, arrowheads and knives, serrated discs, ceremonial blades, serrated and blank axes, handles, animal heads and masks, dragons, fish, birds, naturalistic animals, insects, surface decoration, dish with coiled bird and dragon interlacery, shroud, plaque. This is a museum. I am making a list to keep thoughts of you at bay. So it is to hold a conversation with your absence. I.e., be my young and only wearing a gold chain. Decorate our wedding night with flower garlands and blue curtain drape. Let's begin the music lesson, the family concert. Give rise to the interior of, fly across the world and see. Fishing boats in a calm, fishing off an estuary, landscape with the ruins of. river landscape with a view of 2 cows and young bull beside a fence in a meadow, the watermill with the great red roof. Be our own landscape with travelers, to see in a boy blowing a firebrand an enchantress, to see everywhere a battle between the gods and the giants. So be an artist wearing a capitalist's pajamas. So be a capitalist unbuttoning an artist's shirt. So be perpetually an orange lion in a suit saying shh, head of a bearded man, an open half door. So do what we said we weren't going to do. One day, I'll give you all of February, Russian doll style. Ekla cholo, ekla cholo, ekla cholo, ekla cholo re. A mortifying ordeal to be seen. There was a window. Those evenings, after a day daring discipline, I'd stare at the window from my little landing across the way, and the dogwood tree. My thoughts were a new species of firefly undiscovered as of yet. The window belonged to other occupants, but I didn't care who they were, i.e., it wasn't my window, i.e., economy and society. But I felt a kinship with it. The dogwood silhouette rescued the window from being a plain old pane of glass. A specific leaf would sway, and at twilight at that. That leaf took on a worldly density, as if inked. Like a painting? No, a summons, as if the window was an oracle, an opening to a wild where we could be ourselves for a spell. Oof, the largeness of feeling window gave as I gazed at her from my still little life. The glossy blackness of her leaf. Window, she was me. Wind, light rain, Texas, 2020, and there she was, what I still am. I can't tell you why I couldn't stop staring at that window. A kitchen window, of all things. Mercy, it was or wasn't a window. It was the shoebox my cousin kept her hand-fashioned dolls in, Bula Apu, what I called her, not her real name. It's the screen I slumped before to wade worn and wide emails. I didn't fall behind, but politely and discreetly apart. Dogwood, window, the wasps repurposing the arm of that plastic wicker chair into a home. The pair of mockingbirds alighting so near, I felt, I swear, on the inside, the gentleness of their feathers. Imagine, an ordinary afternoon. Some harm had occurred. I hadn't noticed until after, i.e., lately. I was alive, but staring. Recovery was a gentle and jagged reintroduction to my own wonder. Where had she been? I, along with her red flower dress I never wore again. I can see it so clearly still, the window my gaze made of the wars that went on, all that thunder, a frequent stab of lighting. They returned eventually, my two minds, I mean, their limpid and lean logics. Mercy, time, window. Love poem. Dear beast, you only respond to marrow scooped clean. Here is your bread, sliced into neat, warm ovals. You stare. I touch your silk snout. We shiver. Some nights, I let you kiss abruptly through the mask. You pant. I whisper. It's impossible. I make you anyway. Is it that you have nowhere to go? No. Your family loves you. But here you are the only monster, the last and first star, the one in the clan who won't stay put. Tonight, like other nights, you arrive when you said you wouldn't. You cannot always afford me. I do not always have what you lope about looking for. Only we know how this works. Be still. It isn't so easy to keep the leash buckled to its collar. No touching the art, security says. Okay, we say, okay, and part our torsos, for security is blind to our mockingbirds inside. No touching the heart, security says. Okay, we say, okay, and part the pillars of darkness. Now walk towards flowering cherry and autumn maples, mockingbird commands. Ready, set, goa, a Chakma memory, dyed fabric, drapes a bridge. Now spell matriarchy, mockingbird commands. Love, the first word we learned in the enemy's language. I leave the gallery or linger. I become an etching, window shopping, allusions to the sea, light palette, ewer and basin, Cupid and Psyche. I once was and will never again be virgin and child, the rape of, by. Are you also trying to understand what it is to be the master? And I'll stop there.